Hello and welcome to Beyond Today, the program that addresses the future of our community through conversations with people who are working today for a better tomorrow. I'm Ray Shermonte, your host for Beyond Today and Assistant Executive Director for the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. In our last program, we discussed historic preservation as an economic development tool. Today, we want to learn more about stormwater runoff, problems today and what's in the future. Our guests today are Ralph Metcalf from the City of Tampa Engineering Department and Elia Raj from Hillsborough County's Engineering Department. Good afternoon and welcome to the show. Stormwater, we got to make this subject interesting today, so it's not it's not something people think about, but I have a feeling this winter they've been maybe thinking about it a little more.
There were several who had very little else on their mind in December, yes.
What I'd like to ask you though, Ralph, is how did you get involved in this field and what are your duties now?
I am by training a civil engineer. I've worked for consultants, worked in the aerospace industry, and then for consulting civil engineers. Came to the city with the sanitary sewer department, have been the director there for about 10 years, and have took over the stormwater division for the city approximately 5 years ago. So I've sort of secured this route to here.
So it's all kind of put together now.
Right. We have the sanitary and stormwater, different systems, but same department at this point.
Lee, how did you come to be involved in?
Well, I also have a civil engineering degree, and I got a master's in environmental engineering. And I joined the county about in 1991 almost. And at that time, the county was trying to put together a permit for environmental compliance for our stormwater system. So at the time, I started working on that project, and we're still, the permit is still in effect today. And it's just, it was a fascinating field to work in because nobody else has had these permits before. And our permit was the second to be obtained in the state of Florida. So it was a challenging time. We had to coordinate with the EPA and state agencies to what's the best thing to do to protect stormwater from pollution and things like that.
I'd like to clarify a little so everybody understands exactly what we are talking about. A lot of people say the sewers and they kind of refer to it generically. Can you explain exactly what stormwater is versus a normal sanitary sewer?
Okay. A normal sanitary sewer is connected to your toilets, your sinks. It is the water that comes out of your house. Stormwater 20 years ago was called drainage, and it really is rainwater. When we really have two aspects we talk about in stormwater. One still is drainage. In fact, the city has a phone number listed under drainage for people who don't know that they really should be called stormwater, because when something has been flooded in front of your house or in your house, you're concerned more with drainage than anything else. So we're really talking rainwater versus domestic wastewater. And in Tampa and in the Hillsborough County, they are separate systems. In many older parts of the United States, they have combined systems where you have one set of pipes that does both, and not very well. We're very lucky we do not have a combined system here.
Yeah, that wouldn't seem like a good idea. I didn't realize that was ever combined. Lee, in Hillsborough County, I know that's a fairly new thing. You said you came in 1991 and began working on plans. Did Hillsborough County have an extensive stormwater system before that, or is this like a new area they're getting into?
Oh yeah, we've had a stormwater system on ground for a long time. And as you know, the county is always expanding, and we have more demands on that system, and the system itself is expanding. And the permit that I'm talking about is called the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And it was generated by an act of Congress in 1987. And by 1991, the EPA had already put the rules out of what the counties around the nation need to do. So what we had to do here in Hillsborough County, basically, is tell the federal government where our storm sewer system is and what are we doing to maintain it and operate it properly. The purpose of this was mostly to show the EPA and the federal government and the state consequently what are we doing to protect stormwater from pollution, pollution abatement basically. And so we had to go and do a lot of testing basically, do a lot of mapping and come up with a program to do our stormwater management in the county.
Now really we might, I guess from what you're saying, be a little bit ahead of some other areas as far as planning for stormwater?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, Sarasota County was the first one to get their permit. Hillsborough County was the second. And there's a lot of counties still in Florida who are just starting this process. And because of our previous experience, that we get to meet with them a lot. We get phone calls asking us, well, how did you guys do this? What did you do to cut the cost? Because all these things came down from the federal government and there was no money associated with it. So we just had to work around what we have already and try to make these things fit together and put something together that's acceptable to the federal government.
Now, are the county and the city, are they two totally separate systems to collect stormwater, or what kind of issues overlap between the two jurisdictions?
Well, there's a couple things, and one thing that I don't think that Ely takes enough credit for is also Florida is considerably ahead in 99% of the case of the nation in stormwater and most water issues. We live very near the water. Water's our lifeblood. And mostly we are on the cutting edge of water legislation and these kind of things. In terms of, if you looked at a map, you would see, of course, that the city of Tampa, in a lot of respects, is downhill, as much as we have hills in this county, in this state, of the county. So a lot of the water in this county eventually more or less ends up in Tampa Bay. That's mostly where it goes. And so there are many places where the county's water runs through the city's property, through their system on the way to the bay. And we cooperate very well. Times, for instance, this last December, we had wished the county was not quite so enthusiastic about sending us as much water, but there was nothing they could do about it. We were just overwhelmed, of course. But yes, we cooperate very well in these things.
Do you feel like we handled this winter, all this extra rain? I believe in December, didn't we have like 10 times the normal amount? I mean,
it was the biggest December ever.
My
I think
impression
it was close to 20 inches at times.
That's tremendous.
Huge amounts.
Considering that we had that much rain, I guess it seems like it could have been worse. It didn't seem like it was as bad.
It could have been much, much worse. One of the problems is what we call antecedent conditions. How soaked is the ground before the next rain? If the water table is not up, the ground still has some absorptive capacity, it can take some of the rain that falls on it. When the groundwater is right to the top, and that has been where it's been basically through December, any more rain is absolutely all runoff. And at that point, it's all in the streets, it's all in the creeks, it's all in the pipes, or out of the pipes and on the streets. With the kind of numbers we've had, nobody can afford a system that would handle that kind of thing. You simply could never build a system like that. We had relatively small amounts of flooding. When I say that, I mean structural flooding, not street flooding. A lot of street flooding, considering the amount of rain. St. Pete ended up on an order of magnitude worse than we did, and part of that's an accident of just geography. So I think we came through very well. We probably didn't do things perfectly, but on the whole, we were fairly well prepared. We knew it was going to happen, and both groups operationally did about all they could.
It seemed like you all were pretty busy from what I could
We
tell.
have an overtime bill that is just frightening.
Well, hopefully it'll get a little drier. Eli, in the new developments that are being built, generally, I guess the standards are higher for stormwater runoff than they were maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Is that a correct statement?
Absolutely. In about 1984, the Southwest Florida Water Management District came into existence, known commonly as SWIFMUD. And with SWIFMUD came new regulations that were not existing regarding stormwater runoff. Basically what it does is, for new development, they have to hold back water for the purpose of water quantity, to cut down on flooding from new impervious areas, and for water quality, to treat that stormwater runoff before discharging it into a lake or a river or the bay. And that, the new developments, we don't have as many problems as we have from developments that were there before these regulations were into effect, where there's no drainage systems in some cases, and when there is a drainage system, it was designed to allow as much water to get out without considering what might be downstream or what have you. So we have much better regulations than we've historically had previously.
Now, the result of those regulations is really, I guess, ponds that people see in some of the newer developments. You see these, I would call them stormwater ponds, but some people might just think that they're lakes put there, but there really is a purpose to those other than the appearance.
Absolutely. And the purpose of these, what we call stormwater ponds, and as you said, some people do refer to them as lakes, is specifically to hold back stormwater, especially in times where there's a lot of flooding, where there's a lot of rainfall, so that you don't flood the system downstream. And they also, as I mentioned, they do water quality treatment. There's the plants that are in these ponds that take up the nutrients, and there's actually the time to allow for any suspended solids that's in that stormwater to just settle down and deposit on the bottom of that pond.
And not go into, I guess, our other lakes and rivers.
That's right, or our wetlands, which we have a lot of wetlands around.
Now, the city of Tampa is in a somewhat different situation. I guess there's not a whole lot of stormwater ponds in the city, is there?
Well, actually, and there's two things. Another thing that planning has done that's one of these ostensibly very simple regulations is now in the city, and I think there's a similar county regulation that says when you build a house, your floor elevation has to be 18 inches higher than the crown of the street. And what that does, you can go into older, even affluent sections, a Sunset Park, a beach park, you can see houses that were built in the 50s that are built on the same level as the street. When the street floods, the house will flood. If you build your house up a little bit, the street will flood and your house won't flood. And that's a big difference if you live there between having water in your yard and water in your house. In answer to the stormwater ponds, the city of Tampa has somewhere between 96 and 100 stormwater ponds, either detention or retention. And there are a lot of private ponds that have been put in by development regulations. The estimate is somewhere between over 1,000 of the, and they may be very small ponds depending on the size of the property. So we have those ponds. One of the problems you have in a place like Tampa, the closer you get to the water, the bigger you need to make your pond because the groundwater is up high and the more expensive the land cost. I do not want to build a pond on the bayshore because I've spent $1 trillion buying the land for it. So sometimes when you're out in the county, land values may be a little less. You can afford to build a bigger pond. So we have a very urbanized, highly developed, and we have different solutions. You don't have one size fits all for the solutions to these things. But we're still talking, there is a difference between drainage and stormwater quality, and we have to work well with both of those.
One of the things you mentioned that I thought was interesting, you talked about the houses. It seems like as you go back farther, though, the houses were built up. When you look at the houses in Ybor City or older areas.
Absolutely. And they had dirt under them. Those,
right.
They worked great. But at some points, it's probably analogous to what happened with the design of houses when electricity was cheap. We went from big overhangs to the old ready kilowatt ads of the 50s where people built houses, electricity was cheap, overhangs didn't matter, efficiency of those, it didn't matter. Now it matters again. We're seeing the same kinds of thing, and it's basically common sense anymore now that we know what the bay can do. It's relatively cheap to raise your house with 18 inches of dirt. It's not cheap when you have to put in new parquet every 3 years.
Right. Now, that is a rule throughout Hillsborough County or just in the city?
That is a rule in Tampa. Hillsborough County has a similar rule. I can't swear whether it's 18 inches or not. But it's sort of a commonsensical thing to just build the land up a little bit there.
It does make sense, and it would seem like it would avoid problems we've had in the past.
And Tampa also has a problem that Hillsborough County has to a lesser extent, at least as you move away from the bay, and that's tidally influenced flooding. We live obviously in Tampa Bay. When the water is up in Tampa Bay, systems that would normally work very well to drain the water don't work very well because the bay is up higher.
Yeah. I'd like, when we come back, I would like to explore that a little more because I know a lot of Tampa's flooding is related to that. We'll return in a few minutes to continue speaking with our guests about stormwater. Welcome back to Beyond Today. I'm your host, Ray Sharmonti, and we've been discussing stormwater runoff with Ralph Medcalf and Aliyah Raj. Ralph, you were talking a little bit about the tides, but I wanted to kind of get into more detail on that because I know I hear a question from a lot of people is, you know, why does it flood in South Tampa, or why does Henderson Boulevard flood? And I know there's a logical reason, and I'd like to hear you kind of explain what happens.
Certainly. We have in Tampa, and it's really the same in Hillsborough County, there's two kinds of flooding. One, you either live in a series of bowls where there is some natural relief, ups and downs. The water tends to go to the bottom of the bowl. One thing that all of us know is the water is going to seek its own level and go as low as possible. The other way is if you live where it's very flat, and that characterizes certainly everything south of Kennedy and somewhat north of there. The average elevation above sea level for, say, for one West Shore is between 5 and 6 feet. probably the highest point in Inner Bay is, say, 17 feet. There's what passes for a peak there. A good high tide can normally be up to 3, and the tides may run between 0, 3, -1, highs and low tides. The only thing that makes stormwater move is the difference in the relative height of the water it's going to, i.e. the bay, and where you are. And there are streets that literally, when you have an elevation of 3, 3.5, a good high spring tide, which can be made worse with a southwest wind, which really does push the water up in the bay substantially, your system has very little impetus to move. You may only have 1.5 feet, 2 feet of difference between those two elevations. The water through the pipes doesn't move very fast. Remember, if the bay and where you are is at the same level, nothing moves. And we can have tides. We've had tides of 5. We've had those kind of storm tides without a hurricane. When you hear the hurricane numbers, of course, of a 17 storm surge, there's going to be nothing existing for great quantities. But when you have those kinds of numbers, it's almost impossible to build a system, no matter how big you make the pipes, that will drain the water out in all respects. When you add to that you may have one of the classics, of course, in Tampa is the intersection of Henderson and Dale Mabry, everybody's old friend, and that's probably on the order of 2 miles to the bay. If you put pipes in there that literally triple the size that were there now, you could get a partial fix that would cost in the order of $6 to $9 million. And that would be to stop something that happens about 6 times a year and is usually gone in an hour and a half, and is not going to stop it when the big tides and the big rains come. So you have to decide, is that what you want to spend your money on?
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important, and I think what you're talking about is it's the timing that really has so much to do with it. If the rainstorm comes right at high tide, so it's very unpredictable.
Absolutely,
when that's going to happen.
A person who's lived in South Tampa for a long time in the summer tends to avoid certain intersections when it's raining. It's hard-won local knowledge.
Right. Lee, in the county, you have a different set of problems, I guess.
In addition to the two examples that Ralph gave, the bowl kind and the tidal kind, we have a similar kind that we have in the county. You have some of it in the city, is people that have built before regulations were in place in the floodplains of some of our rivers. Mm-hmm. Those rivers have historically got to a certain level when we did historically get a lot of rain, and they did have to crest and fill their floodplains. Now, in a lot of cases, we have people that have built into these floodplains, and within the last 10 years or so, for example, they did not experience any flooding that they might have experienced now. And the reason for that is that, well, the river did not fill up the floodplain before, and because we didn't have the rain before. And here we have a lot of education to do and work with the folks and explain to them that, you know, this is where historically the river was, and then your house is built on that property. So that's one kind of flooding that's we have a lot of in the county, is just properties that are flooding, and then you have a house right there in the middle of the property surrounded by water, basically.
You know, just to follow up a little bit on that, when, you know, you mentioned 1984, but was there not any type of regulations where you could build a house before that?
Yes, there were regulations before, but they were not as stringent as they are now, and they were not. They did not foresee the kind of growth that we have today, and they did not expect all the impervious areas that we have today that result in water running off and these rivers cresting the way that they're cresting now.
Even those earlier regulations probably don't go that far back, though, do they? I imagine there was a time in Hillsborough County when there wasn't really regulations at all.
Yeah, yes.
So you probably go back 10 or 20 years before that and there wasn't any. Do people understand then, or does the government kind of get blamed for this problem, or do they understand why they're having this problem?
Well, after the rainfalls that we've had, I've learned why patience is a virtue, and we just, you know, the first thing we have to do is we have to put ourselves in the shoes of these people that are calling us or that are showing up, and we have to understand it from their perspective. If your house is flooding, if you can't get access to your house, that's very stressful, and we try to understand, you know, their perspective, but at the same time we look to see what we can do immediately to resolve the situation. Can we pump the water somewhere? Can we provide them with sandbags? Can we put the sandbags for them? Can we help them in any kind of immediate fashion? On the long run, we try to explain to them why the flooding is happening in that specific neighborhood. Yes, we get blamed, the weather people get blamed. There's a lot of blame to go around.
I didn't know the weather people got blamed.
But the main thing is that in certain areas where we do have problems, we go in there and we try to find solutions for these problems and implement them. And we have a capital improvement program that's designed basically to alleviate a lot of these problems that could be alleviated by a retention pond or bigger pipes or things of that nature.
In a minute, I want to follow up a little bit more on that, but I wanted to talk about the city's plans for the future. I mean, is there a stormwater plan for the city, or do you feel it's pretty much the way it's going to be, or what's going on there?
The city's plan, we have an ongoing capital improvement program on the order of a slightly less than $4 million a year. And this is not a utility, it's a revenue-funded capital improvement plan. Probably 90% of that is operation, maintenance, repair of our existing systems. The thing that is going to help us get ahead on some of this is the half-cent program. The city is, that we are getting on the order of an extra $1.7 million a year for projects to help us get ahead. Now, that sounds like a lot of money. In stormwater, that's not what, there are dozens of projects that you could spend $10 to $20 million on. I mean, literally dozens. If you wanted to put all of Tampa up to, quote, the ideal, the number, and it's only a planning number, could be $600 million. I mean, it's a huge number. But what we concentrate on, of course, is eliminating structural flooding first for a given size storm. And I think we're doing very well at that. Tampa has about 113,000 properties, I found out this week. At one point, that our goal was, as written in one of the comp plans, to have less than 2% of structural flooding. And I know we're there because I don't get 2,000 calls. And when you get flooded, you tend to call somebody. So we're fairly far ahead of that. We're never going to get it perfectly. And the kind of thing that happened in December simply is not something that we are going to be able to keep water out of people's yards. We may be able to keep it out of most of the houses. We do keep it out of the great majority of the houses. We had some flooding, not a whole lot. Of people's houses, and normally they are people, for the accident of geography, are in some place that is going to flood first, not unlike the floodplain that Ely talked about. So our long term is to do better with what we've got, to maintain our system as efficiently as we can, and to use the capital improvement tax to slowly get ahead, if you will, on this.
Now, Ely, what about in the county? What plan? I imagine the plans are more extensive in the county because growth is occurring so rapidly. And are you also using the community investment tax to assist?
Yes, we have part of our program is funded through the half-cent sales tax that Ralph just mentioned. We also have the stormwater fee in the county, which brings about $3.6 million a year in revenue, and all that money basically goes to stormwater projects. And we also get part of the MSTU funds to assist in those projects. In addition to what Ralph just mentioned in terms of how to solve these problems, I guess part of the things that we're trying to do right now is as these people are calling us and when we get in touch with them, these neighborhood associations, we're trying to educate them on what to expect. If people expect that every time it rains there's not going to be any water in the streets or in the yards, then we have an uphill battle basically, because no matter how much money we can probably spend in the county, we will never achieve that goal. So we have to make the people understand that the policy is that our foremost thing is to protect houses, structures, and then after that we protect yards and the public right-of-way, which is our roads, for emergency access, for all these different things. So there's a lot of education process that's going on right now to make sure that the expectations are realistic with how much money we have available for this capital improvement program.
But you basically have a planning process that you're going through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have, as we speak right now, we are going through a master planning process for the whole county, where we're going to look at all the watersheds in the county and try to come to assess them from a flooding perspective. We're going to use a lot of data that we collected from this flooding event that we have now, and try to concentrate on that. And also with that, we are adding an environmental component that's going to be very important in terms of if and when we came up with these solutions, we want to make sure that they are environmentally acceptable, and that if there's any opportunities for pollution prevention or abatement from existing pollution, that we want to implement that in our programs. And one thing that we're actually doing is we're going to try to communicate as much as possible with the neighborhoods that could be affected with these master plans to make sure that what we are doing is acceptable to them and fits in with their priorities as well as ours.
I think that's real important, communicating with the public. I know an interesting communication is the little signs I've noticed in Ybor City at the curbs with the fish on it. I guess people don't realize, but most stormwater ends up in the bay, and it does have pollution in it.
Yes, I've had people I've talked to that said, you know, if you want to do this, pour your oil in here, just take it over the bayshore and dump it right on a fish, because that is where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And the education is incredibly important. Most people don't realize that your sanitary sewer doesn't go the same place as your storm sewer, and your storm sewer is not treated by a treatment plant. You know, that's a very big kind of an education thing to that people really do not realize.
That's why I thought that the sign at the curb, I mean, it really, when I looked at that and said, this, you think if you throw your Coke or anything down there, that it's really going to the bay.
Well,
I don't think people would think about that unless they saw that
There's
little
a lot of people
sign.
that really do think, and I found that out on Franklin Street. We had one of our public work weeks where people were out there talking to us about this stuff, and they kind of thought that, well, whatever you put down the storm sewer, it's okay because it goes to the treatment plant.
A treatment plant, it gets cleaned.
There is no treatment plant.
Well, we all have to understand.
Well, and the other thing for education, I think
the
it's real important, is that when we talk about pollution from stormwater, basically, as we all know, the bay is the receiving water. Ely and I both serve on the National Estuary Program. I'm the mayor's representative for the policy and the management committee, and we basically have fairly good news about the bay. There are people who say, oh, the bay is horribly polluted. And what we found is that the bay is basically doing about as well as it was in 1950, before the downhill slide started. So when we talk about the pollution of the bay, it's really not as bad. You know, the news has been basically very good for the last few years from there.
That's great. Well, I'd like to thank today's guest for talking with us about stormwater runoff in the city of Tampa and unincorporated Hillsborough County. Next month, we will talk about school siting. Let us know if you have comments about today's show. You can reach us at our hotline or on email. It's listed here. I'm Ray Sharmonti. On behalf of the Planning Commission, I thank you for thinking beyond today.